This pattern this morning is called the Woodduck. I've got a 16 nymph hook in the vise. I'm gonna use some 14-aught shear, kind of a tan color thread. The Woodduck pattern, the Woodduck Nymph pattern, is one that I first saw tied by Barry Ord Clarke, who is a phenomenal fly tyer. I've learned so many things just from watching his videos. I would suggest you do the same thing. I wish I was a tenth of the fly tyer that he is. So it's called the Woodduck Nymph because just about all of it is woodduck, with the exception of some copper wiring and some copper wire and some superfine dubbing. So I've got myself a piece of a brassy sized piece of copper wire, and we're just going to catch that in on the far side of the hook. And once I catch it in, I'm going to just draw the copper back a little bit, so I don't have to clip it with my scissors. And then I'm just going to take that back a little bit towards the back end of the hook here. Take a look at my placement there. This is going to be a little bit tapered, so we're going to keep some of the materials that we're tying in here in place, because it'll just help us build up a little bit of that bulk. So from here, we're going to go ahead and turn right to our primary ingredient here, which is the woodduck feather. And actually, I'm going to use this woodduck feather here to tie this entire fly, with the exception of the copper and the superfine that we'll use for the thorax. So I'm going to prepare this feather I'm just going to go ahead and strip off kind of these bottom fuzzier feathers on the, or fibers on the feather, just like so. And what that's going to do for me is get me non-fluffy feathers, but it also creates this great little handle here that we'll use a little bit later. Not essential, but it is kind of handy. As usual, you can see the shaft of the feather here, hopefully, and if you hold your fibers straight up perpendicular, kind of like this from the feather, what you'll find is you should end up with a pretty good alignment of the tips. So if I now pull that down a little bit, hopefully you can see some of that, how that's aligned a little bit. And once I have that, I'm going to pinch those tips with my thumb and my forefinger, and that's going to help make sure that they stay in alignment, so they're there. And then I'm just going to go ahead and rip those right off of the shaft of the feather. I'm going to take those fibers, we're going to get a measure. I want the body, or the tail here, to be about the length of the body. So I'm going to measure them to about right there, and right about here is body length, where my thumb and forefinger just grabbed. And now as I move my thumb and forefinger back to the very back end of the hook, when I tie these in, they're going to either be right where I want them, or they're going to be really close to right where I want them. So I'm going to just take a couple of loose thread wraps and kind of evaluate what I've got here. I do want those on the top of the hook. Lengthwise, not bad. So I'm good with that. I'm going to go ahead and tie that in back to the point where I'm going to be tying in my body material, keeping that thread or that copper wire on the far side of the hook, and keeping those tail fibers on the very top of the hook. So I'll turn it, like I always do with my rotating vise, towards me from time to time to just kind of see where I am. That's one of the features of, one of the reasons I like the rotating vise so much, but maybe not for everybody, but it allows me to, especially with my OCD, I want to make sure everything is as close to right as I possibly can. From there, I've got my tails in, I've got my copper in. I'm just going to take this thread forward towards the front of the hook, right about where I want to start my thorax, because I don't want to overcrowd the eye of the hook here. So if I tie it too far forward, I'm going to start getting way too much material around the eye, and I don't want to do that, because that does crowd the eye and make it difficult to kind of finish off the fly the way that I want to finish it off. So now I've got those fibers sticking out the front. What I'll usually do is this, where I kind of just turn the hook sideways in my rotating vise so I can get into it with my scissors pretty easily and make that clip. Then I can turn it back into position. So here we have it. So far we've got our tails in, we've got our copper wire in, ready to go. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to tie in the material we'll use for the body. And for the body of this fly, we're going to turn back to that same wood duck feather. And I'm going to take some fibers, and I'm going to want these to be fairly long fibers because they're going to wrap up the hook to be the body. So I'm going to pull those perpendicular. In this case, I don't necessarily need those tips to line up. By having them line up here this way, it'll give me a little bit more length. But I'm not worried because they're not tails or they're not legs, so I'm not worried about them lining up too much. So I've got my little chunk there, and I'm just going to, again, forefinger and thumb. Then I'm just going to pull on that feather, and they'll come right off. So once those feathers are off, or those fibers of the feather are off, we're going to tie it in with the tips. So these are the tips. The butts are back here that came off the shaft of the feather. The tips are going to be towards the eye of the hook. And since I don't want to fight it, and I don't need to, I'm just going to do a couple of thread wraps here, 2, 3, or 4. Take it a little bit backwards. I'm not cranking down on it because I'm wanting to pull on the back end here, and you'll see these fibers start to come back towards the bend of the hook. And what that's going to do is that just helps me get that additional length, just to make sure that I have enough material to make it up to the front of the hook. Once those are in place, I'm just going to take that thread back to where I want the abdomen, the back of the abdomen to start, because that's where my body is going to be started when I tie it in. And from here, we're going to just pretty much, got a straggler, that's okay. We're going to work on our taper. And once I get to this point, I'm going to go ahead and give myself some extra thread, and I'm just going to put in a half hitch here. And the reason I'm doing that is because I am going to use the rotating feature on the vise to put this body on it. I want to be able to hang my thread on my bobbin cradle without the concern of my thread coming unwrapped from the hook, which it won't do if I've got a half hitch tied in like I have. So I've got my hackle pliers here. And I'm going to attach them to the very back end of this wood duck clump of fibers. So it should look about like that, hopefully. These are somewhat delicate, so you don't want to be pulling hard, but you want to be pulling hard enough that they stand straight up. And as I wrap up the body of the hook, I want to miss the I really want to miss that point on the hook, because that will just cut right through those wood duck fibers, and then I'll just have to unwind my thread and tie on another section of body of wood duck, but hopefully we won't need to do that. So now we're just going to take these kind of touching turns, moving up the shank of the hook, and you can see hopefully now why it's important to have some long fibers, because we come pretty close to running out of material fairly quickly. So at this point I've got my thread off of the thread cradle, or the thread cradle. I still have the pressure on these fibers, because if I let go of them right now, they would just completely come unwound, and I'd have to do it all over again. I enjoy tying flies, but I don't necessarily enjoy doing the same thing over again. So there we go. I took a couple of turns behind it. I'm taking a couple of turns in front of it, and that should be secure at this point. And I can just let go with my hackle pliers. Now it's not coming unwound. And you can see the excess on top here, and we're just going to clip that excess off here with our scissors, just like so. So once we get to that point, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the body, or rib the body here. And we're going to do that with this copper wire that we tied in earlier. And we're going to counter wrap it, meaning I'm wrapping this the opposite way that I just put on those wood duck fibers. And what that's going to do for me, and what I'm doing here is trying to get as close as I can to get some pretty even wraps moving up. So this copper is doing a couple of things for us. Probably at least 2, if not 3 different things. One, it's giving us that nice bug segmentation that we like to have in this pattern, because this is going to be like a Baetis or a Mayfly. So it gives us the segments that we want. The other, by counter wrapping this, it's going against the grain of what I did with my wood duck fibers, and so they're now secure. So it's going to make this fly a lot more durable in holding those fibers in place. And then last of all, it's actually giving me the bonus of some additional weight on the fly too. So I'm going to go ahead and take my thread a tiny little bit forward, again preserving some space here at the eye, and I'm just going to take a few additional wraps here. They're just going to be touching wraps. These are going to be covered up when I tie in the thorax. And the only reason I'm doing this is to just give this fly a tiny little bit more weight. So I've got that. I don't want to go any further because I want to keep some space there by the eye of the hook. So you can see there's my copper wire. I'm actually going to pull it backwards towards the bend of the hook. Okay, so we've got some nice thread wraps over the top of that. And now we're just going to helicopter, use that friction and spinning and a little bit of tension on that wire, and that copper wire will break right off right where you want it. And now it's time for us to go to the next material, which is not really the next material. It's the same material, but the balance of this feather is going to be used both for the wing case on this fly as well as legs. I've got too many fibers on here right now, so I'm actually going to take a moment and strip some of those off to where I want it to be. So again, these tip ends here of this wood duck, they are going to be our legs, and they're going to fold backwards. And so I want to kind of get a measurement where when I fold these back, they're going to go about half the length of the body. So I'm going to tie those in right about here. Now that's much better. Okay, so I've got a wrap on. I'm going to take a look for length on these to make sure that they're long enough but not too long. They are a little bit longer than I might want, so I'm going to actually pull on the feather here at the back and just draw it back a tiny little bit to get where I want to get. Now I want to keep all of this stuff on the top of the hook, so I'm going to tie forward carefully to just behind the eye, and that's where we're going to fold our legs back. I'm going to do that because we're going to tie on some dubbing, and I don't want those legs to spin around underneath the fly when I'm putting that dubbing on. So by tying it off and securing it up by the eye, those shouldn't move anywhere. And then you can see on the top of the hook, we have the balance of the other side of that wood duck feather, as well as this back end that I use as kind of a handle. And I want this to be centered over the top because it's going to fold over and be my wing case. And so I'm going to tie back to where I want the thorax to start on this fly. And I'm going to kind of wiggle this balance of wood duck back and forth, left and right, over the top of the hook. And what that does is just helps make sure I land it pretty good in the center here. So hopefully you can see that. We've got that about where we want it. So here's our dubbing, and all I'm going to do is slide that down just a hair to get that a little bit closer. So we're going to start tying in our dubbing right about here. This is going to be the thorax. Thorax is going to be thicker than the abdomen. It's going to be thicker also towards the bend of the hook, and hopefully get a little bit more tapered as we move up towards the eye of the hook. So I will just continue to kind of tighten that down as I make these wraps, just like that. I do want a little bit more on there, so I'm going to go ahead and reach for my dispenser again, and I'm going to grab just a little bit more, not a ton more, but just a tiny bit more that we're going to go ahead and add to our thread at this point. And so there's my little bit of extra. I'll slide it down as well. So I did the last, and I'm going to take this more towards the back because I do want it beefier back here in the back of the hook, or the back of the thorax. That's pretty good. And I'm running out of dubbing right about there, which is going to work just fine for me. Our next step is we're going to do our legs. And when we do our legs, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my thumb and I'm going to push those backwards over the hook like that, over the back, kind of kinking them. So once I've got those pushed back like that, what I'm going to want to do is try to get about half of them on either side of the eye of the hook, or either side of the hook. And I'm going to grab my first bunch closest to the lens of the camera. And this is going to be hard for you to see because I'm kind of trying to hold it in place with my finger while I tie that in. Just about like so. So that gives me some legs on this side closest to the lens. Now I still have this other bunch poking out over the eye, and I'm going to fold this stuff back as well. But I'm going to fold this back up against the side of the hook that's closest to me. And I'm just going to pinch that, and I'm going to start wrapping backwards. And by wrapping backwards, I'm securing it in place, but I'm also going to have those legs hopefully laying backwards. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and take this wood duck feather balance, and I'm going to just fold it right over the top of the whole operation here. This is going to be our wing case. I'm going to do a pretty loose thread wrap here just because I want to make sure that doesn't curl up, which sometimes it will do if you've got, it'll kind of fold itself on itself, if that makes sense. So hopefully you're able to see that there. We still have it in place, so I could still muck around with it if I needed to. But it's secure, and it's got a nice little wing case going over the top with the legs sticking out in the back. I'm going to take one more wrap here. I'm going to pull the whole thing backwards here and take a couple of wraps right behind the eye of the hook. Then I'm going to go back over the top of it once more, and then go towards the back of the head here, and let my thread dangle just right there. From here, I'm going to come in with my my scissors, and we're going to cut this last piece of wood duck off, and I'm going to try to cut it off kind of at an angle, right about as close to the eye as I can. So now that I've got the butt ends there kind of clipped off, I'm going to go ahead and take some wraps up behind the eye and just kind of clean up a little bit of the butt ends there. Then I'm going to take it back towards the back end of the head here, and we're ready to put our whip finish on here. I don't need a really big head, so I don't want to build up too much bulk here. So right behind the thorax, I've got my whip finisher out, ready to go. We'll just do a 4 or 5 turn whip finish here. Let that off. Pull that tight and somewhat backwards. Boy, the point of that hook just got me. That felt really nut. I'm going to turn that a little bit just so I can see. I want to clip it off pretty close underneath here. Just like that. Then I'm going to take a look and see, okay, what do we got here? And I am good with the way this is looking. So there's the Woodduck Nymph. Again, tied almost exclusively with one wood duck feather, with the exception of the copper segmentation and the superfine dubbing we used here for the thorax. Everything else is wood duck. It's a good looking nymph. It fishes really well. I really like it. And for me, it kind of looks like almost a blend between a pheasant tail nymph and like a hare's ear or something like that. So give it a shot. Great fly to tie.